The mess hall of the Crimson Talon was a cathedral of chaos. 300 species, each with their own dietary requirements, cultural taboos, and personal space boundaries, crammed into a chamber designed for half that number. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur-based proteins, methane breathers in their containment suits, and the ever-present hum of translation matrices struggling to keep up with 17 simultaneous arguments. Nira sat alone at a corner table, her human frame looking almost comically small compared to the hulking forms around her. She'd learned early in her deployment that solitude was a luxury worth fighting for. In her hands rested her prize, a sandwich. Not just any sandwich, but the sandwich sourdough bread she'd bartered 3 weeks of dessert rations for. Real earth tomatoes grown in Hydroponics Bay 7, and actual cheese from the dairy cultures she maintained in her personal locker like precious children. She raised it to her lips. Anticipation building. 6 months in deep space, eating protein paste and nutrient blocks, made this moment sacred. A blur of gray fur and rippling muscle shot across her vision. The sandwich vanished. Nira's jaw hung open, her hands still positioned around empty air. Across the table, perched on a bench designed for species 3 times his size, sat Tak. The young Kravik warrior barely past his naming ceremony, held her sandwich in his 3-fingered claws, examining it with large, golden eyes that suggested both curiosity and challenge. The Kravik were known throughout the galactic community as apex predators. Their homeworld was a death trap of evolved carnivores, and they'd clawed their way to dominance through sheer ferocity. Standing 7 feet tall at maturity, with natural armor plating and retractable talons that could shred duralloy, they were the galaxy's premier shock troops. Wars were won or lost based on which side secured Kravik mercenaries first. Tak was young, perhaps equivalent to a human teenager, but already possessed the characteristic Kravik confidence. His crest was still developing, mottled gray rather than the deep crimson of maturity, marking him as a cub in warrior training. He'd been assigned to the Crimson Talon to learn from veterans of a dozen species. Mine now, soft skin. Tak rumbled in broken standard, his translator struggling with the growls and clicks of his native tongue. Warrior claims spoils. The mess hall's ambient noise dimmed as nearby tables took notice. A Vrelian merchant whistled concern. 2 Ganthus Marines exchanged, knowing glances they'd seen this before. Humans were new to the galactic stage. Their homeworld only contacted 15 standard years ago. They were considered weak, fragile, barely evolved past their planet-bound existence. Most species gave them wide berth, not out of respect, but out of pity. Nira's face remained expressionless. She stood slowly, her 5'4" frame utterly dwarfed by the young Kravik. The top of her head barely reached his chest. "Put it down," she said, each word crisp and clear. Tak's throat vibrated with what passed for Kravik laughter. He raised the sandwich to his mouth, rows of crystalline teeth glinting in the recycled light. Nira moved. Later, witnesses would argue about what exactly happened. The Vrelian merchant insisted the human teleported. The Ganthus Marines, veterans of 3 campaigns, claimed they saw her move but couldn't track it. What was certain was this. One moment, Nira stood 3 feet away. The next, she was behind Tak. One leg hooked around his ankle, her other foot driving into the back of his knee. The young Kravik, caught completely off guard, stumbled forward. His warrior training kicked in. He tried to pivot, to use his superior strength and mass, but Nira was already moving again. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it at an angle that made his claws reflexively open, and snatched the sandwich from midair before it could fall. Tak roared, more from surprise than pain, and spun. His free hand came around in a swipe that would have disemboweled most opponents. Nira ducked under it, stepped inside his reach, the most dangerous place to be against a Kravik, and drove her elbow into a nerve cluster just below his ribs. Not hard enough to injure, but precise enough to send a jolt of numbness through his side. The young warrior stumbled back, shock registering in his golden eyes. Nira stood before him, sandwich held in one hand, her breathing barely elevated. "Mine," she said simply. The mess hall was silent. Tok stared at her, his crest rising and falling rapidly, a sign of intense processing among his kind. He'd trained since he could walk. He'd bested warriors twice his size in the proving grounds of his homeworld. Yet this tiny, soft-skinned creature had moved through his defenses like smoke through a hull breach. Slowly, deliberately, Tok dropped into a crouch, a Kravic gesture of acknowledgement. His claws retracted completely, and he tilted his head to expose his throat for a brief moment. "Warrior recognizes warrior," he said in his own tongue, letting the translator carry the weight of the ritual words. Nira held his gaze, then nodded. She broke the sandwich in half and offered the larger piece to Tok. The young Kravic's eyes widened. Among his people, sharing a kill, or in this case, a claimed prize, was the highest honor one warrior could offer another. It meant acceptance, respect, and the acknowledgement of equal standing. He reached out carefully, almost reverently, and took the offered half. They sat across from each other, human and Kravic, and ate in companionable silence. Around them, the mess hall slowly returned to its normal chaos, but with a difference. The conversations now included a new topic. The human, who'd earned a Kravic warrior's respect. Word spread quickly through the ship. By the next cycle, even the captain had heard the story embellished and exaggerated with each retelling. But the core truth remained. From that day forward, Tok shadowed Nira during training exercises, studying her movements with the intensity his species reserved for master weapons instructors. When asked by his clutchmates why he followed a human, Tok would simply say, "She is small, soft, no claws, no armor. But she moves like death dances. Humans are not weak, they are efficient." And Nira? She just smiled and made sure to pack 2 sandwiches from then on.